the Ethiopian church took all of this literature, which included literature that nobody considered scripture at the time, and they appear to have just been non-discretionary and included everything.
A dying Ethiopian monk's last words about Jesus Christ are stirring up questions the modern world was never meant to face. For 60 years, he stayed shut away in a cliffside monastery high in Ethiopia's Tigray region, standing guard over a manuscript older than nearly every surviving copy of the New Testament, a book he never preached from, never quoted, and never once let out of the room. He held on to that secret until his final night alive, and the 3 teachings he finally spoke out loud, teachings he attributed directly to Christ, are the reason historians, believers, and skeptics still can't agree on what actually took place. The forbidden manuscript Brother Johannes, just 26 years old, grips a brass basin with trembling hands. Across the room, Deacon Mikhail can't even bring himself to look straight at the book lying on the goatskin blanket. The writing on those pages is Ge'ez, the language Ethiopian tradition says angels once spoke, and this is no ordinary Bible. While the Western canon settled at 66 books, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church held on to 81, among them the Book of Enoch, the banned text that tells of the Watchers, fallen angels who came down on Mount Hermon. But tonight's secret goes even further than Enoch. The book resting beneath Abatekel's fingers is the Mashafa Kiddas, the Book of the Covenant. Almost nobody outside these walls has ever even heard the name, and for centuries the monks worked hard to keep it that way. Consider the Gospels for a moment. Between the resurrection and the ascension lie 40 days, and Luke compresses what may be the most important stretch of the entire faith into just a handful of lines, 40 days shrunk down to almost nothing. According to the dying monk, that gap in the story was never accidental. It was left empty on purpose. The first warning Abatekel's voice has faded to barely a whisper. The manuscript claims that when Christ came back after the crucifixion, he didn't return to comfort his followers. He arrived like a commander issuing final orders right before disaster struck. His first warning was direct. Don't build temples out of stone, because stone will eventually fall. Build the temple inside the heart instead, because that's the only thing that lasts. This wasn't meant as poetry. It was aimed squarely at the systems that would later rise using his name, leaders who would use sacred authority to accumulate wealth and power, empires that would fly the cross as a banner while ruling through fear and bloodshed, crusades, inquisitions, towers raised on the backs of the poor. Long before any of that unfolded, the dying monk is reading his disciples the church's own future, written, he insists, in the words of the very man it claims to follow. Johannes feels sick to his stomach because he stood beneath those very towers, yet the old monk just shakes his head as if to say this was the mildest of the 3 warnings. And if even the gentlest one unsettles you, stick around, because the 2 teachings still coming are the ones Abatekel protected most fiercely of all. The monks believed that if these final words had ever made it to Rome, the entire structure of institutional religion could have crumbled within a single generation. Johannes glances toward the door, as though worried someone outside might be listening. Walking Tombs, this next teaching, the monk rasps, is less about theology and more a diagnosis of the human soul. Every person carries 2 invisible forces inside them, the wind of life and the wind of error. But the wind of error isn't ordinary sin, it behaves more like an infection. It slips in through greed, through corrupted desire, through spoken lies, and once it takes hold, it slowly hardens a person from within. The Mashafa Kadase calls these people walking tombs, men and women who keep eating, keep working, keep going through the motions of life, while something sacred inside them has already died. And the cure isn't ritual, ceremony, or the church itself. The cure is knowledge, direct, personal awareness of truth, with no priest standing between a person and the divine. Christ tells his followers to guard their own minds the way sentries guard the gates of a city. Then comes the line the monks called revolutionary: the kingdom of heaven is inside you, hidden in the silence between your thoughts. Read that again. If ordinary people across the Roman world had truly believed it, fear would have lost its grip, and the temple systems built on it would have collapsed, which is exactly why the next warning had to be buried at any cost. Darkness wearing his face the candle is nearly burned out now. Abba Tekel takes one long, ragged breath and delivers his final warning. In the manuscript, the risen Christ tells his disciples something that has chilled every monk who's ever read it: the darkness will come wearing my face. Not as an obvious enemy, not as a tyrant anyone could easily point to, but as a deception dressed up perfectly as holiness, speaking in his name, carrying his symbols, building monuments in his honor, quoting his own words while quietly tearing apart everything he stood for. According to this text, the Antichrist was never meant to be a single man arriving in the future. It was a system, an institution hiding behind the image of Christ while betraying his message from within. Deacon Mikhail finally lifts his head, his face drained of color. Because the monks of these mountains never believed those words described some far-off prophecy. They believed the betrayal had already begun, and that a stranger from the West once came close enough to prove it. The scholar who came close, his name was Jacques Mercier, a French ethnologist, the kind of careful, credentialed expert the Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique in Paris sends when something genuinely needs authenticating. In the late 1990s, Ethiopian authorities entrusted him with the Garima Gospels, illustrated manuscripts later dated between 330 and 650 AD. Among the oldest surviving Christian texts on the planet. Handling them cracked something open inside him. He later described the silence in the room, the weight of the pages, the way his own hands trembled as the realization hit. These books predated nearly every authority he'd ever been trained to trust. Only fragments of the Mashafa Kadase have ever reached outsiders. And everyone who's touched them describes the same sensation, the floor of everything they believed sliding out from beneath them. Abba Tekel has carried that same feeling since 1965. Now he lifts a trembling hand off the vellum and points down at the bare stone floor beneath his bed, because the manuscript, he whispers, isn't the most dangerous thing hidden in these mountains. What Rome truly wanted destroyed lies buried beneath their very feet. His warning about Christ, the monk insists, was never only about teachings. It was about everything Ethiopia held on to that Rome wanted gone. Think about what rests in Axum. For nearly 3,000 years, this country has maintained that the Ark of the Covenant isn't lost at all, that it sits right now inside the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion. The Kebra Nagas tells how the Queen of Sheba met King Solomon, how their son Menelik I later returned from Jerusalem carrying the true Ark home, leaving a copy behind in its place. Now picture how the Bible itself describes that object: armies wiped out, men struck dead the instant they touched it without permission. Read as observation rather than legend, those symptoms sound unsettlingly close to exposure to a powerful radioactive source. Only one guardian is ever allowed near it, chosen, sealed away, never seen in public again. And across the generations, those guardians have declined in the same way. Failing eyesight, early cataracts, pale skin, deaths that come far too soon. Abba Tekel's voice tightens. The Knights Templar came searching for it in the 12th century and left their symbols carved into the rock. In 1896, Italy invaded with modern weaponry and was crushed at the Battle of Adwa. To the dying monk, none of that was chance. It was the same hidden power his manuscript warned the world would one day try to bury. And the Ark, he breathes, isn't even the strangest thing these mountains hold. The impossible churches his eyes drift in the way they only do when he speaks of Lalibela. He saw it once, at 29, and after 60 years alone, it's still the memory he returns to most. Because Lalibela doesn't look constructed, it looks pulled straight out of the earth. King Lalibela's 11 churches weren't built stone by stone. Entire structures, walls, pillars, chambers, drainage systems were carved downward into solid volcanic rock, where a single miscalculation meant permanent ruin. Modern engineers estimate the work should have needed tens of thousands of laborers and more than a century to finish. Tradition says it took 24 years. And the tons of rock removed in the process? Simply gone, no debris fields, no quarry anywhere nearby. The churches remain, but the stone carved out of them doesn't exist. The monks have their own explanation. Abba Tekle says men carved by day, and by night angels finished the work using tools of light that pass through stone like water. Johannes wants to dismiss it as legend, but researchers studying the fragments noticed something odd: descriptions that resemble resonant frequency manipulation, the idea that sound and vibration can move solid matter. Swap out the angels for that, and the impossible architecture suddenly stops sounding so impossible. The most famous of the churches, St. George's, descends into the ground shaped as a perfect cross, and recent 3D scans revealed sealed chambers that haven't been opened in nearly 800 years. The architecture itself, the monk whispers, was built to hold the teaching. And the teaching, he says, runs in the blood. The bloodline. This is where Abba Tekle's warning turns genuinely dangerous. In the West, the story of Jesus ends at the Ascension, and any talk of a bloodline gets dismissed outright. Ethiopia never let that go. The Solomonic dynasty ruled here for nearly 3,000 years, right up until 1974, and its last emperor, Haile Selassie, carried the title Conquering Lion of the Tribe of Judah, not as a poetic flourish, but as a literal claim tracing his ancestry back to King David. Think about what that implies. If Mary descended from the house of David and Ethiopia's kings preserved that same bloodline for millennia, then this land's connection to Christ may never have been purely spiritual. It may have been familial too. Then genetics entered the picture. Studies have found ancient Levantine genetic markers in Ethiopian populations dating back roughly 3,000 years, directly linking ancient Israel to these highlands. It's why the church still observes the Saturday Sabbath, circumcision on the 8th day, and the old dietary laws, customs it never revived, because it never actually abandoned them. Which leads to the question the monk fears most: what if Jesus survived the crucifixion? The highlands still carry whispers of a man who arrived from the north long ago, a healer the locals never called Jesus. They called him the righteous teacher. As the old saying goes, the West has the water, we have the well. Why now? Then Johannes finally asks the question Abba Tekle has waited 60 years to answer. Why break 60 years of silence tonight, with the candle nearly out and death already in the room? Abba Tekle opens his eyes. Because, he says, this is the moment the warning was written for. The Mashafa Kadase describes the final age using a Ge'ez phrase that translates roughly as webs of illusion. A world drowning in connection yet empty of truth, where people speak without standing together, see without using their own eyes, and let images race ahead of what's actually real. Read that again. Screens, noise, manufactured reality, a description written nearly 2,000 years ago that sounds exactly like the internet, social media, and the earliest stirrings of artificial intelligence. The monks were never simply preserving scripture, he says. They were holding on to a message sealed for the moment humanity would finally reach these exact conditions. The trigger was never a specific date. It was recognition. And the darkness wearing Christ's face, the institution that quietly buried these books at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD because they made human beings spiritually free. That darkness, Abba Tekle believes, is no longer approaching. It's already here. The candle flickers out. Johannes hears the rattle deep in the old man's chest, and Michael's eyes fill with tears. Abba Tekle lays one ink-stained hand flat across the open pages of the Mashafa Kadase, the warning finally spoken aloud after 60 years of silence. So tell me in the comments, of the three teachings, which one hit you the hardest? The temple built within the heart, the silence between your thoughts, or the darkness hiding behind a familiar face? And subscribe before you go, because this old monk didn't guard these words for 6 decades just to watch the people meant to hear them scroll on by. What he revealed tonight is only the beginning.